Good morning. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, October 9th, 2018. And the first item on our agenda is adjustments to the agenda. Any adjustments to the agenda from the board? Any from staff?
No.
Then we'll move on to public comment. And I have a couple people signed up for public comment. And when you come up to the podium, if you'll just state your name and where you're from for the record, and then I'll start a 3-minute timer. So the first person on public comment is Nancy Green.
My name is Nancy Green, and I live on Pine Grove Road outside Eugene, Oregon. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to come and share our case with you about the county herbicide spray on the guardrails of Pine Grove, Spencer Creek, and Gimple Hill Roads. I also want to thank Melanie O'Hara for her kindness and her wonderful fielding of calls for people who are calling in about this situation. But the concern we have is the honeybees. My husband has honeybees, and several other families have honeybees in the area. And they're struggling right now. My husband's had a hard time in the last few years keeping the hives going. So an herbicide is a serious consideration, but also my neighbor is being treated for lung cancer. And I just don't think it's a good idea for those sprays to be in her neighborhood either, but it's not good for any of us. And spraying is a short-sighted answer to a long-term solution. And I do appreciate that the county has tried to get low-toxic sprays. However, that's not non-toxic. So my husband and I have lived on Pine Grove Road since 1970. And during those years, the county wonderfully has come out and cut the blackberries along our road. It's been a manual labor, and the sheriff work parties would come, and that's been happening for a long time. So I was a little bit surprised about the herbicide spray. After speaking with Melanie on the phone about this, my husband and I got our clippers and gloves and rake, and we went down and clipped the blackberries off of the guardrail that is adjacent, just across the road from our property and our bees. So we got that all cleaned up, and the county could come along with their roadside equipment and just cut the top off of it. And I have to say, I do appreciate the county coming and cleaning the vegetation along the road. That's been very helpful. The blackberries, the county views the blackberries as a foe, but the honeybees, they see them as a friend, a place for them to gather pollen and nectar and to make their delicious blackberry honey. And this honey is an Oregon product sold. It's part of Oregon's economy, which we need to protect. When the blackberries are in bloom in our area, it's called the honey flow because so much of our local honey is made from the blackberry blossoms. Honeybees travel between 2.5 to 3 miles radius, so they cover about a 5 to 6 mile area, and they need our protection. In our area, we have 2 beekeepers that I know of on Pine Grove, 2 beekeepers off of Gimple Hill. One of those families is with us today, and another beekeeper on Spencer Creek. So in our area, I think my husband knows the exact number, but we have lots of bees, and they need our protection. Lots of honeybees, they need our protection. And it seems like if we cooperate with each other and with nature, we'll have a healthier place to live, and we'll be looking at a long-term solution and not pesticides or herbicides. I'm requesting, today I'm here, because I would like to request a dispensation for our community, Pine Grove, Spencer Creek, and Gimple Hill, at least for this year. I didn't have time to contact all the homeowners that have guardrails on their property. If I could have done that and they could have called into the county to ask for a no spray zone, that would have been wonderful. But 3.5 days wasn't enough time to do that. So it's a big job, and I know you're doing the best you can, I'm sure, but still, I think we need to think long term. So just to finish, I want to quote from Friends of the Earth and Bee Action. a publication I just received. It says U.S. beekeepers lost an average of nearly half of their hives in the last year. Half of their hives. Then consider that 40% of the invertebrate pollinator species, including bees and butterflies, are on the brink of extinction. Finally, add that 1 out of every 3 bites of food that we eat is pollinated by bees and other pollinators. It doesn't take a genius to do the math. Bees are canaries in the coal mine, warning us of imminent and frightening threat to our food. And if we want to save the bees and ourselves, we have to do something now. So that's why I'm making this request. And I thank you for the opportunity of speaking, and I'd be happy to answer questions or make clarifications of what I've said, if that's appropriate. I don't know. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. And our next speaker is Becky, and I can't quite read the last name, so if you don't mind pronouncing it for me.
It's Munt, M-U-N-D-T,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, couldn't read the M.
And I'm Becky Munt, and I am from Greenbrier Drive, right across the valley from Nancy and Ron. And Nancy's done such a good job. I'm going to let her have stated all of those things for me as well, because they're very clear. I am been thinking about how to say what I wanted to say here today quite a bit, and I guess the main thing that I want to say is we need sometimes in our world to step back and take a bigger perspective. And we come at a time, the UN report last week says we have until 2030 to change our ways, or global warming is going to be a serious crisis. And if you look at the history of what we do, particularly in the last 200-300 years, we seem to have this great propensity to find solutions in chemicals that turn out to be not quite as wonderful a solution as we thought. In the early 20th century, we used arsenic in all of our orchards until we discovered that wasn't such a great idea. You can go back further. The Romans all thought it was great to make dishes out of lead. And more recently, we've had the DDT and herbicide sprayings and pesticide sprayings in communities with malathion that have led to literally thousands of Americans dying of leukemia and cancer in their 30s due to mitochondrial disruption. We have Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which is the highest concentration of chemical and petrochemical companies in the world, where the cancer rates in those towns is 800 times higher than anywhere else in the world and in the United States. And so every time we take this toxic approach, we're really playing a game of Russian roulette that we may or may not be successfully able to negotiate later. We have bees, we have birds, we have a great many wild animals because we run our property completely organic without any sprays and without any intervention other than what nature would provide, composting and that kind of thing. And watching nature flourish and at the same time being aware that there are these threats that we can't control can be a very frustrating and terrifying experience. And for us, we would like to ask that we simply be given a little more time to consider the consequences and come up with better solutions. We understand that these blackberries are on embankments and on guardrails, but certainly it was a relief to us to be able to have the guardrail between Nancy and Ron's and our house protected by simply having the residents file the no spray applications. We'd love to have the opportunity to have time to have that effect throughout this little area of ours. We're a small little valley. The last thing I would like to say is that we don't know the consequences of these pesticides long term because there's no financial incentive in doing the research. But the University of Texas out of Austin last week has come out with a new study showing that Roundup is toxic to bees, and we've been being told for literally 4 decades that this is the safest pesticide there is. So I just ask that we could maybe step back and reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. That's everyone I had signed up to speak in public comment this morning. Is there anyone else that wants to address the board? Seeing none, then I will turn to the commissioners for response to public comment and/or other issues and remonstrance. Commissioner Sorensen?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you to your for our public commenters. I really appreciate you coming in here, taking the time to drive in and find parking and address the board. I hope that something can be done to address some of the concerns that have been raised here. One in particular I'll point out is that when we made our last revision to the county's roadside spray policies, we made a list. We have a list of chemicals that can and cannot be used. And I don't know all those chemicals, but I do know that in the time that we've been working on this, which predates my service on this board, that there have been decisions by other governments besides our own U.S. EPA about the safety of the chemicals. Because in the beginning, we kept referring to the EPA list, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency list. If they said it was safe, then that weighed in favor of using the chemical. They said it was unsafe, we wouldn't use it. Well, they said most things were safe, and our friends in Western Europe have banned the Roundup product, and they've done it after their own careful scientific research, so I guess we have competing views of what is or is not safe. And I guess my skepticism about the current administration and the current EPA leadership would be that maybe we haven't been as safe as we should, and maybe we should then look at our own list where we say, well, if it's on EPA's list, it's okay. So I know that Mr. Schumacher is here today, and he's very knowledgeable on what our policies are and the pros and cons of changing those. But I guess what I'm hearing is, and I've heard this from other beekeepers, is that that Roundup in particular has been implicated in the worldwide bee die-off that we're now experiencing. So thank you for coming. And one thing I would do is invite you to email the commissioners, because we do have a public website where you can just click on and email all 5 of us at once. And I would encourage you to do that, because sometimes when commissioners get email, they're able to give it to staff and ask even more questions. So thank you for coming in. The other thing is, I don't know how many people get the Lane Electric Rural Light magazine. I do. I don't read it that often, to be quite frank, but on the cover of this month's October 2018 Rural Light Lane Electric magazine is Noah Stryker. And as you may know, Mr. Stryker, a resident of somewhere between Eugene and Cresswell, was given an award, and I mean award like money, to go all over the world looking for birds. And he set the world birding record in 2015. He's a graduate of South Eugene High School and Oregon State University, where ironically he majored in fisheries management. He says he doesn't know a lot about fish, but he knows a lot about birds, and he saw over 6,000 birds. He birded every day in calendar year 2015. I had a chance to meet him once, and anyway, phenomenal guy. He now makes his living writing about birding and birds. He's associate editor of, I think it says Birding Magazine, and he's been all over the world on his big thing. And last but not least, I'll say that this is the Centennial. 2018 is the Centennial of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, passed by Congress in 1918, and the National Geographic Society has declared the year 2018 as the Year of the Bird. So there you go. Thank you.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ladies, for your testimony this morning. I had a great conversation at the end of last week, perhaps over the weekend, with a gentleman from your area who is also a beekeeper. I asked him to bring this issue in this forum, as you have done, because I wanted to make sure that not only all of my fellow commissioners had an opportunity to hear your concerns, but also we have staff here and some highly professional people here. So thank you for being here and bringing this issue up, and I hope that we can offer some clarity and some direction and understanding. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for indulging my being behind schedule a little bit, conducting some personal business. I caught your testimony, the last lady who spoke from the wings, and heard your concern regarding bees. You know, last year I was at Willamette High School, and they have it's a student awareness day, and the students each write a bill that they would like to take to the state legislature or to a different government. And no less than 3 groups had bills concerning bees and concerning the national crisis that we have regarding the die-off of beehives. Interesting information. Thank you for bringing the information today, and I will study what you presented. Thank you. I'd also like to mention, Mr. Mokrahayski, that 2 weeks ago, since Mr. Schumacher is here, I'll mention it at this point in time. I had a chance to do a little bit of asphalt paving out on Corey Road. And I got to tell you, the crew that was out there was so professional. I used to asphalt pave years ago when I was in high school for Tillamook Asphalt Pavers, a small company. One of the things we did was the Mount Hebo Air Force Station Road. The work that your crews do today, are the Local 626 crews, is amazing. And the way you can really tell is when they bring the seam together in the middle. Take a look at that seam. You couldn't even see a seam. It was perfect. The product they use, the job they do, especially based on the fact that that one paver that they have has been around for, I don't know, I think before I was paving at Tillamook Asphalt Pavers. No, really, it's, but I think it's the one paver that we do have, and the crew spent probably close to 45 minutes conditioning it before they started using it that day. And I was just highly impressed with the work that they did. They let me rake a little bit, let me sit up on the paver a little bit, and it felt like the old days, the smell of hot asphalt at 9 a.m., nothing quite like it. So thank you, and thank the crews very much once again for giving me that opportunity. It was great, seeing how they take care of not just the road, but the road sides also, making it safe for people to come in and out of their driveways. And some of the paving actually feathered into the driveways, into gravel driveways in some places. So it was really a professional job done by people who clearly care about their work. So thank you very much. It was a great experience. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Lakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to say thank you very much for coming forward this morning and testified under public comment. We underwent a pretty comprehensive look at bringing some limited spraying back to Lane County a few years ago. And we had I think, a very diverse task force involved, but I think I think it's always good for Lane County to take a look at this program. And so I appreciate you just coming forward this morning and talking about, you know, maybe what your experience is right now. And so I think it's good for the county to take a look at, okay, what's working, what's not working. It's just really trying to evolve the program and so we can best serve the citizens. So I want to say thank you very much. What Commissioner Sorensen mentioned, sometimes it's kind of tough to find a parking spot and get here in the morning, and so I really applaud you being here this morning. One other thing I'd like to add is, I don't know if you saw last week, an interesting article came out in several of the financial news periodicals regarding Amazon. And Amazon is the first company ever to be valued at $1 trillion. I mean, think about that for a second. That's a private sector company. They have gone forward and decided that, as many of you know, many governments around the country are mandating a $15 an hour minimum wage. They have gone forward and they've mandated that. Here's the issue that's now happening, and some of the employees are actually complaining. they stripped away incentive and stock purchase options to put forward the mandatory $15 an hour, as was brought forth by the governments. Some employees now are complaining that the $15 an hour wage will cause their paychecks to decrease because they will no longer receive the incentives. So someone making $13 an hour was receiving incentives and stock purchase options that would have equaled more pay than what the $15 an hour wage. And so it's one of those things that I've always said before, as someone who owned a business, you have to be very careful about when governments come in and I think the reasons are noble, but the challenge becomes then the business then will react and move forward on creating a mandate on the wage, but then we'll take things away. And it's kind of interesting. It actually caused Senator Bernie Sanders to actually look at this and now bring Amazon in and ask him this very question. And Amazon's response has been, but we were told that we need to put forward a $15 an hour wage for employees, and we're doing that. But we will do a give and take. I thought it was pretty interesting to see that. So I salute them for providing $15 an hour wage for all employees. That's their starting wage. But at the same time, they're going in and saying, but this is what we can afford. And so it's kind of interesting to see the back and forth and how businesses will look at when they're involved, because there's just times I think government doesn't need to belong in human resource issues. It becomes complicated, and here's one that I think is very complicated. Most of this is affecting what they call their warehouse employees. And so warehouse employees with Amazon were actually receiving incentives and stock options, and that will be taken away. And I can tell you right now, I'd love to have a stock option from a company whose value is $1 trillion. I'd rather have that than the wage increase. That's me personally, because in the long run, that'll be worth significantly more than what the hourly wage increase would be. So I thought it was pretty interesting just to see that dynamic and what's happening. And a lot of times this is what will happen, is that the private sector will adapt and to make sure that their bottom lines, the profits, because people look at the profit, but what they don't see is that Amazon is actually one of the highest charitable giving corporations in the world as well. And along with a lot of these other Fortune 500 companies. I just thought it was kind of interesting just to see this back and forth that's occurring between the private sector and then what the government will vote on and mandate for them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I want to thank the folks from the Pine Grove area coming in and talking about their beekeeping concerns and herbicide concerns. Commissioner Lycan brought it up. This was limited use of herbicides in our roadside vegetation management was brought back to Lane County after we got citizen petitions from the ag industry concerning some of the invasive species that our roadways were bringing into their fields, where the invasive species that can't be controlled by mechanical means, that actually mowing spreads their seeds. And I'm not an agronomist, so I can't remember the name of the knapweed that was specifically cited that will ruin the value of hay crops completely if it gets into fields. That can't be controlled by mechanical means or other means. And the concern was, how do we deal with some of those and maintain the value of our ag producing community, which is a big part of Lane County's history and our economy. These species that come from the Orient or wherever else can be highly damaging. That was why we brought it back in. It was brought back in after receiving multiple signatures on petitions in the hundreds, and we started a process where we put together a task group that included folks from Beyond Toxics and Alternatives to Pesticides, the Farm Bureau, all sorts of interest groups. And ultimately, the recommendation they brought to the board was brought forward in a unanimous consent format. So we had all sides agreeing on how we were going to move forward with this. part of the reason we got that was the list of chemicals we use is not the EPA list. It's a list that's run through our Public Health Advisory Committee, which has doctors and various professionals on it. So it has a little bit more scrutiny than you would think. So that's where our list of chemicals comes from. And the applications were going to be extremely limited. And I do understand we post ahead of time and there's an opt-out ability. And I was just wondering, maybe it sounds like you guys were able to opt out, that you had enough time to opt out for your particular areas. And that's maybe the only question I have is, you know, I'm also a cyclist. So, you know, Pine Grove, yeah, I'm one of those guys. Yeah. And I saw the signs out there. In fact, I specifically remember the one posted on the guardrails on Erickson, and out there. Didn't go by slow enough to read the entire sign and see how many days in advance they were out there and whether there was phone numbers or contacts for opt-out. But maybe, you know, Oren's here in the audience, if you could maybe just kind of describe that notice and the ability to opt out, and is there an ability maybe to do that in advance, you know, for, you know, folks that are a beekeeper to maybe say, you know, we'd like our particular guardrail to be permanently off the list or anything like that. Just, if you don't mind, Oren, yeah.
Oren Schumacher, Chair Bozovich, Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity. I first want to say, in my 15 years of dealing with this, that was some of the most knowledgeable and polite public comment I've ever received. I truly appreciate it, and it makes it highly productive. It's very receptive when it's brought forth that way. In regards to your question, Chair, what we have is what we call no spray area program. So residents along county roads can apply for a no spray area application. That can be effective within under 24 hours. So I believe these residents all applied for their properties. Now, I think what was being questioned was the Gimple Hill Spencer Creek area as an entirety. We don't offer that because not every residents apply for their property adjacent to the right-of-way, not for a given road or a given area. So if that guardrail exists adjacent to their property, they can apply for the NSA or can go around campus and encourage neighbors to do the same. And once they opt in, it's good for 3 years, and we don't spray in those areas. So if that reflects the question you were asking, that's what that protection is, and it can happen almost immediately once they submit an application online.
So are you basically done with your guardrail spray for that vicinity for the year?
We aren't. That area was posted. What we do is we do a 7-day advance posting, which provides a contact number for people to call with questions or to become more familiar with the NSA program that we have available. We do a posting for 7 days in advance, but that doesn't mean we're going to spray on day 7. Weather and other factors, staffing and issues arise that may prevent us from. What we do is we say we're not going to apply within 7 days of that posting. So it gives this buffer of time if people want to take alternate routes or seek further information, they can. After that 7 days, it could be 10 days or 12 days until we apply. But we maintain all of that on our website about the days of application, all the post stuff. Every week that's updated for people to view and see. So, and one of the things around the bee issues is I'm not a bee expert. And we did have some people on the task force who were highly involved in the awareness around amphibians, birds, and bees, specifically in the honeybee issue across the nation, actually across the world. And one of the things we decided as staff is that part of our code says we need to be cognizant of these issues and do everything we can to minimize impacts. So one of the approaches we've taken, which I thought was pretty universal, was let's do our guardrail applications in the fall time when it's already post-flower. The plants are going dormant, and what that is more successful for the herbicide application with less toxicity because we're hitting them, they're absorbing down into their roots, and hopefully maintaining 3 to 5 years with limited or no further applications. And also the pollinators are done pollinating at that point. So we thought we were satisfying both criteria that people wanted, and that was discussed during the task force time too. So we've tried all those angles. I think everybody realizes in programs like this, it'll never be perfect. But again, this program is adaptable to comment. Every year we'll be coming to the board in the winter time to present our applications of that year, what we plan to do and our findings. And those are the times I think that we can really adapt and adjust. And none of these products are set in stone. They're reviewed annually by the Public Health Advisory Committee. Again, the board will see those. So we always have time to adapt to the feedback that we get from residents to make changes as we see the public wants. So hopefully that answers the questions you have.
That's a great explanation. Thank you.
You bet.
So any further remonstrance from the board? Thank you very much. So with that, we'll move on. Do we have any emergency business for the board this morning?
No.
Seeing none, we'll move to our consent calendar, and these are items that are considered routine by the Board of Commissioners and will be enacted in one motion in the form listed below. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion was desired, it would have been pulled from the consent calendar during adjustments to the agenda. So do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar? Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move approval of the consent calendar for October 9th, 2018.
Second?
It's been moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Williams. All those in favor of approving the consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Moves us on to County Council and announcements. And I understand we are not going to have executive session today. Mr. Mokohysky?
That is Mr. Dingle?
I don't believe so. I'm still waiting for Ms. Wilson to respond.
Yeah.
Okay. And then that moves us, any other announcements, Mr. Dingle?
No, Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Dingle, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to get your heads up to you on this, and that I'll be asking further questions from you on this topic. And that is that the Oregonian has written a big article about the Association of Oregon Counties. The headline in the Oregonian was Oregon County Group Misused Funds, Mismanaged Budget, Investigation Fines. And I didn't know anything about this, so it's, I don't want to say much more about it, other than I'd like you to look at the article and see what you can find out about this and any involvement that Lane County's had in this. It just comes as kind of a surprise to me.
Well, I'll take a look. I actually get the Oregonian over here at this place, and I did not see that story in it. But if you send me the link to the article online, I'll certainly take a look at it. I don't have any.
Yeah.
To this point, there's been no involvement with me or with in terms of county council and that particular issue.
Apparently the AOC sent it out to the county commissioners
Last Friday.
last week. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to bring that up under agenda items.
okay.
I plan to do so.
I'll send you that email.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other announcements, Steve?
No, Chair.
Then we'll move on to item 6B, which is a report in the matter of discussing the process and recommendations related to Lane County Chapter 60 disposal of county-owned surplus property. Mr. Dingle.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. You'll recall that, I can't remember when this was, I think it was maybe a couple of weeks ago. We had an auction. There was an issue or a request by Veterans Legacy to maybe get some property donated to them. And so it sort of sparked a more general conversation about what the rules are surrounding this and what the process is. So you can see from the written material, and I believe Ms. Chinsky is in the audience there. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So she drafted up this written material that is part of the agenda. But just I wanted to give the overview. First of all, with regard to the specific piece of property in question here, one of those items, which has been valued at $25,000. It was purchased with road fund money, and we all know that under the Constitution, that would mean that if that specific piece of property were donated to Veterans Legacy, the road fund would need to be reimbursed for $25,000. That's, for example, the board will recall that another example of our requirement that we comply with that when it comes to road fund money is even when we were renting or leasing to the city of Eugene right-of-way, which was purchased with road fund money, we had to obtain from the city the fair market value by the square foot for the lease. So that's just one example. But overall, what I wanted to emphasize and bring forward is that the general policy of the county when it comes to surplus property is that that any process that donates that is done with two things: one, total transparency; three, and an equal opportunity for everyone to participate in it. And that means that, for example, in this case, although it's complicated because of the road fund issue, which I think is an issue the board's going to have to come up with an answer with, if we were to do, let's assume for a minute that this was not road fund money, we would do some sort of notice posting that we would make it available to all 501c3s, and they would all have an equal opportunity to make a proposal, just exactly like what we did with the forced work camp. And the other thing to remember is that this money, when it comes to these items that are up for auction, they go to supplement and go back into the fleet. And I know that has been raised as a concern that things taken out of this auction and donated does result in a net loss. Now, that's not to say that that wouldn't be the case if we had followed policy and put it up for the auction. It went through the government and 501c3 auction, and then it went through the public auction and no bids were received. If that's the case and there was no minimum bid, then I feel fairly comfortable saying that the property has no value. But that wasn't done in this case. So clearly there's an understanding that at least the chipper has a $25,000 value road fund, and it was purchased with road fund dollars, and then the tractor has an approximately $1,000 value. Eric, that's the overview. That's all I have, and I'm prepared to answer specific questions if there aren't.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Dingle. Clearly the road fund has its stipulations that we need to adhere to. I have a couple of questions regarding history. Have we circumvented what seems to be our policy in the past and given surplus items to nonprofits without going through the bid process?
I am not aware of any.
You're not aware of it?
I'm not, but I want to emphasize it's never reached my level before.
I understand. Okay. Then, so it's speculative whether or not we have, but you cannot remember doing so. Okay, I'm not going to propose that we circumvent the rules at this point in time, but we do have two pieces of equipment that are in question here, Mr. Mokrahajski. One is the chipper, high value, which was evidently purchased through with road fund dollars. The other is a John Deere tractor, which was actually used at the work camp when it was a sheriff's work camp. It lived out there, and according to Mr. Johns, when we asked about the value of the two items, I don't recall his exact words, but it was little or no value in that it was anecdotally has transmission problems. I don't know that for sure. I don't know a transmission from a hubcap, but no, I do. I actually do. So I guess as we move forward with this, there really are two different avenues potentially for this. One is because of the road fund, and the other is because of a non-road fund piece of equipment that really has little or no value. And I would expect, Mr. Dingle, that you're recommending that we put it through the regular bid process at this point in time and see who bids on it, and then make an award based upon the bidding.
Yeah, well, I think Mr. Johns has estimated the value of the tractor at $1,000. Yes, and here's what I'm recommending is that we follow the process, which is we put these two things back up for public or for the non-profit and the governmental auction, people to bid on, and then the public auction, and then follow a transparent and equal process. And as a matter, and it's up to the board, I personally would not recommend that you get in the situation where individual groups outside of the process would come to you as individual groups and make a request. I think that would become very cumbersome The process as it's outlined is it's actually split between, it goes to the chief financial officer. I think that's done for a reason to provide sort of two eyes on a particular request. But I think it would become very cumbersome if people could individually come before the board and make a specific request for an individual piece out of the auction, which is, I think, what happened here.
A very cautiously worded admonition, thank you. So by my actually pulling that from, asking for it to be pulled from the auction list, I've slowed down the potential process for Veterans Legacy receiving the tractor. And for that, I apologize. But
Well, right, Commissioner, if I can, that was not the, there was nothing wrong with taking the pause because there was no permanent impact to that, because all it did was sort of maintain the status quo, because it could, obviously it's very easy to put it back in the next auction, if you will. So
the only time delay then is between the last auction that just concluded and the next auction. Okay. Still, for my part in that, I apologize to Veterans Legacy for slowing down the process, which there is a certain time slowdown on that. And Ms. Mokrajewski, I hope we can move forward with the appropriate means of getting this out for bid to the general public in a very open, transparent process that allows for everybody to bid equally on it. We all have expressed our support for Veterans Legacy, and I think we continue with that support. And in fact, one of their main volunteers was appointed to the Public Safety Coordinating Commission just this morning. Former Captain Dan, he'll always be Captain Dan Buchwald, former Sheriff's Deputy at the jail, works with Veterans Legacy. So Ms. Mokrajewski, I withdraw, I don't need to withdraw, it's already been withdrawn, my request for for awarding the pieces of equipment to Veterans Legacy. And let's just go through the regular process and move forward in an open, transparent method that allows everybody to bid on it. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I was just going to say that some time ago, the board approved a gift of surplus computers to Centro Latino Americano. And these issues of disposal of unused county equipment or equipment that we didn't need to use anymore was brought up by the Lane County Council's office because of the, well, if you give it to one nonprofit, why not to another, and why not to another? And are you opening the door to having all the nonprofits come in and say, hey, you got a lot of nice furniture over there at Lane County. When you get rid of some of it, let me know. And pretty soon you could have a lot of groups asking for things. So I think this review is really good to find out, well, what are the parameters? How can we be fair to the groups? But when the specific groups come and ask, or when they make their things known to us, maybe we could help them out. But on the road fund, that's pretty clear. We gotta get money for things that come from the road fund. But that's because of the road fund, not because of our disposal policy. And I think we need to have a good policy so we can help out these groups like Veterans Legacy or Centro Latino Americano, but also be fair to all the other nonprofit groups that are out there. So I think we should, move on this. I think it's a good agenda item for us and a policy issue to get more understanding of what our flexibility is.
Chair Bozovich, Commissioner Sorensen, yes. What I want to emphasize is the direction and the overarching policy of our process is to be transparent and to provide equal opportunity to individuals to do this. And we're working on creating specific procedures. And essentially what it would be is, once we reach a determination that the item doesn't have any value or less than a certain value, what would happen is, and that would only happen after it had been run through both of those auctions or opened up in a public process, we would then do a public notice that would say we have X property that's available for donation. Within the next 30 days, please submit a brief written request as to why donating it to your group would be the highest and best use. That's essentially what we're talking about.
Commissioner Farr, then Commissioner Like.
Pardon me, Commissioner Lakin first. You've not spoken yet. I
Go
just
ahead,
one thing to add.
Lakin.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, we heard testimony this morning regarding folks coming forward when we talk about the limited spray and after the work that we did on the task force. Frankly, this is a good exercise for the board to be engaged in periodically, to take a look at our different matters of how we deal with issues. Frankly, I thought that testimony was fantastic, because while we voted on and we agreed with recommendations, it's always good just to kind of take a look at, how our processes are and how we can improve our processes for the public. So having this come before the board, I think periodically would make a lot of sense, because you don't know how things will change even from a governmental standpoint. This isn't the private sector. So this isn't about maybe some sort of issue with an inheritance, or this isn't an issue where you're giving back and could put something there as far as your taxes are concerned regarding charitable. So I think it's a great exercise just to have and to bring back. So I appreciate the conversations it's happening here. And I want to say, Mr. Dingle, thank you for your overall explanation. And my recommendation is to take a look at this, on an ongoing basis, and just make sure that it is going to be transparent no matter how things are done. Because when you're looking at equipment that's valued at a certain amount, you do want to make sure it's going to be absolutely transparent, because ultimately the taxpayers paid for this. And so you want to make sure that's transparent. So I appreciate this overall dialogue and conversation. And to Mr. Dingle, thank you for your overall explanation of the discussing the process and recommendations related to this disposal of Lane county-owned surplus property. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be very brief on this. When I left the state legislature, to run Food for Lane County. I was requested to do so, and I did. One of the first things that happened there is the Lane County Commissioners donated a number of greenhouses that had formerly been used at the Forest Work Camp, and those greenhouses are in place today at what's called the Grassroots Garden behind St. Thomas Church off of Coburg Road. And I think the sign probably still says "a gift by the Lane County Commissioners" on the greenhouses that are on the extreme northern side of the property. You all were out there 2 weeks ago, so you probably saw the greenhouses. And they're being used. I don't know what process the Lane County Commissioners went through at that point in time, but it was a great gift. Whatever we do from this point forward, I agree with Commissioner Lyken and everybody else and Mr. Dingle that we do it in a fully open process. And Mr. Mokrahysky, we've been given 3 alternatives. The second alternative is to conduct an advertised limited time bidding process for these 2 pieces of equipment only. That seems a little cumbersome, but in order to move the process forward quickly, that would be my preference if it is something that we could do, as opposed to waiting for the next full bidding cycle. So I'd like to have either Mr. Dingle's or Commissioner's thoughts on that. That's option 2 instead of option 3.
So I'll chime in here as I was looking at recommending option 3, just so we stay in the process. My only concern about option 2 is it is going to require a bunch of staff time for 2 pieces of equipment in an out of cycle process. It seems like I'm just trying to think about Mr. Johns and his staff.
Yeah. And Mr. Chair,
he's got fleet to maintain as well as run auctions. So
yes, he does, and purchases to make. So I agree with your assessment on that, Mr. Chair, and option 3 is fine with me.
So I guess I'll look to the board to see if we've got head nods and consent to recommend option 3.
And I will quit making taking action on the Alma Work Camp forever at this point. Because the last time I did it was in 2014, and I gave the key to somebody when I didn't have the authority to give the key.
Yeah, and you can't now. We already sold it for a buck.
That's right.
But and I appreciate the sentiment that was involved in trying to help out the Veterans Legacy folks. But I think this is just a good reminder that we are dealing with the public's assets, And we also have to, so we have to be careful about process. And if we are going to make contributions to various organizations, we have to do that as a board through some kind of process that's open and transparent. We still occasionally will donate use of the fairgrounds to the stand down, kind of out of cycle and all that. But other things like our payments for the Egan Warming Centers go through the budget process, and those even that gets funneled through the Human Services Commission. So it's otherwise it gets to be the free for all.
Well, I don't even
know that. Steve, you might want to mute your phone. So I appreciate the item coming forward. It's a great reminder. It's really great that our staff in the past has built this policy, because the ORS is pretty wide open, in some ways. And it's nice that we've got this piece of lane manual that covers this and provides for an open and transparent way of disposing of public assets. So I appreciate the conversation. It's kind of a great reminder to us all to, when somebody comes in and asking for something, maybe it's, double check in with legal counsel and everybody else before we start, going too far down the road, so we make sure we're not getting outside of a process.
I love the term best and highest use.
Yes, yeah. And I think ultimately, if it gets to be surplus property, that Veterans Legacy can pretty much demonstrate a best and highest use on that. So, but I think going back to the standard process is the best way to go. So I appreciate this item coming forward. Thank you, Mr. Dingle. And
you're welcome, and I will keep the board posted on as we develop those processes, so that you have a chance to weigh in on their content.
Great, thank you. That moves us on to county administration announcements. Mr. Mokuhysky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two quick items. I want to give you an update on the elections process. Election day is November 6th. Voter registration deadline is next Tuesday, October 16th. Active registration is currently 255,568 registered voters in Lane County. Out-of-country military ballots were mailed on September 21st to over 1,600 voters. Out-of-state ballots will be mailed today to over 800 voters. All other local ballots will be delivered to the post office on Thursday, October 18th, and drop site locations will be open on that date. So ballots mailed to local registered voters on October 18th, which is next Thursday, I believe. Statewide voters' pamphlets are expected to be delivered to all households between October 10th and October 12th. And note here that people are hearing that 2 first-class stamps are required to return a voted ballot, and that is not true. You don't need first-class stamps, 1 or 2 first-class stamps, or you only need 1 first-class stamp is required. No stamp is required if utilizing one of the official drop-box locations, right? So if you go to any of our drop-box locations, you don't have to have a stamp. If you do drop it in the mail, you just need 1 first-class stamp, not 2. So that's the election update, and I'll continue to provide periodic updates in advance of November 6th. And then I wanted to just make a comment about our Day of Caring. Commissioner Farr mentioned that county administration had a team together of, we had 15 or 20 folks that participated on the United Way's Day of Caring. This is really every year in mid to late September. There's a day that United Way coordinates volunteer efforts for various public and private entities throughout the community. So our team went and volunteered the morning a couple weeks ago at Grassroots Gardens. I had never been there. Didn't even know it existed, and it's really amazing. On Coburg Road behind the church, there is just a phenomenal facility, and I actually found out recently that my daughter, my fourth grade daughter, is going to be going to Grassroots Garden, and her class is volunteering as well, doing some plantings and things there. So we were harvesting that day, and a wonderful asset for the community, Food for Lane County facility, providing, growing and providing healthy foods for families in our community. So as a community, the impact of this year's United Way Day of Caring was the following. There were 43 nonprofit partners that participated, 40 participating companies, including Lane County Administration, Technology Services, Finance. I think were at least the 3 departments that participated this year. So 43 nonprofit partners, 40 participating companies, 902 volunteers, 3,608 total hours, and a monetary value, if you put all of that staff time from those 40 participating companies, $89,081 on that one day, based on independent sector value, volunteer time at about $25 per hour. So really great. We, along with our county administration team at Grassroots Gardens, was Peace Health, Pepe, there's a technology company that was there, and one other that's escaping me. So a great way to show support for our nonprofit organizations and the great work that they do in our community. And what I think is great is in Lane County, of course, our purpose is to improve lives, and our core behaviors that we value in our employees are a passion to serve, a drive to connect, and a focus on solutions. So this day, while our employees come every day and they contribute their time and talent to improving lives in our community and serving, there's a clear service ethic in our organization. They also take the time to volunteer and go out and support community organizations that are doing good work as well. So that was really nice. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, unless you have questions for me.
Any questions? Commissioner Farr.
Just a quick, question. Mary Bradley, the administrator of the garden, I suspect you work with Mary and her team. She is amazing, isn't she?
Great.
It's, that garden, when I went to Food for Lane County, was about 1/3 the size it is, and they continue to push toward the back fence, and now they occupy the entire property. And the food they produce there is, it's just amazing, the results that they achieve with completely organic gardening methods. Yeah.
We were able to sample afterwards. They had made some homemade applesauce, some of the vegetables that we had harvested, the peppers and the cucumbers. We were able to have participate in preparing that and consuming some of that. And so it was really a neat sort of 360 experience where you see all the waste that's produced there. It's close to a zero waste operation. A lot of composting, and at the end of the day, what they're doing, of course, is growing healthy produce for families who are in need. So, great operation.
And the earth oven, is that still in place there? Did you have a chance to see that?
Yes, yeah, it is. And they baked some bread, so they were baking bread there in the oven, and you can just imagine, between the fresh applesauce with the apples that they were making and the baking bread, it really was. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Anybody who's not visited that place, it's worth it. I mean, take a half a day and tour it, because it really is one of the greatest tours around, just to see what's happening there. Thank you.
Thank you. So that brings us to item 7B, which is the second reading and public hearing and setting a third reading and public hearing for Ordinance 1809 in the matter of amending Chapter 8 of Lane Code to extend the term and franchise agreement with Comcast of Oregon 2 for operation of a cable communications system to January 1, 2019, amending Ordinance 1207. And we have Christine Moody from our Budget and Finance.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Bozovich, Commissioners. The one change that's occurring, why we need to set a third reading, is the date. So as you just read, originally it was January 1st, 2019. Since the first time I came to the board, we have determined that we will not finish negotiations with Comcast in time to have the ordinance completed by that time. And the FCC has started some rulemaking that may well change some clauses in the franchise itself. So that is why we're now asking for an additional 18 months. So actually going to June 30th, 2020. We did present this to the MPC last week. Commissioner Farr was there. And Comcast also reiterated that we're hoping that it doesn't take that long. The goal is to get this done. They also are saying they are believing that we can get done before the 18th month period, but just to, instead of coming back and continuing to move this date, asking for the date out further.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, and thank you for your years of work on the Cable Commission. It goes unrecognized most of the time, but it does take a lot of study and a lot of being apprised of recent innovations, et cetera. And really want to pass along, please, the thanks to Ann Davies for her work as the administrator of the work that the Cable Commission does. The Cable Commission is a subset of MPC that involves just Lane County, City of Eugene, City of Springfield, not Coburg, and not LTD in that process. So it's the work goes unheralded, but it really is. It's something that touches really the lives of almost everybody in the metropolitan area, at least. So thank you very much for that, Christine.
So I have a process question real quick. So we're going to have to go to a third reading because we have a new date that was added into what was now publicized for today. So the language changed from the first reading to the second reading.
Correct, but this new date was publicized.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my question is should we move, we advertised a public hearing today, but should we just wait and open the public hearing at the next reading? Or do we need to open a public hearing and close it today and then do that again on the third reading?
Mr. Dingle still on the line?
No, I think he hung up.
He did.
The title lists a public hearing on both dates.
Yeah. I guess I can go ahead and open and close the public hearing today, but it seems, we usually.
I'm hearing that we need a public hearing today.
Okay.
That's what I'm being told.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I think it'd be best to have the public hearing.
Okay. So is there any other further questions for staff before I open the public hearing? Seeing none, then I'll open the public hearing on Ordinance 1809.
Someone running down 8th Avenue.
Yeah. And it doesn't seem like we have anyone here to speak on this issue, so if there's no one here to speak, then I will close the public hearing on Ordinance 1809. And then I will look to the commissioners for discussion and possible motion to set the third reading and public hearing. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we have here is the date. It's not January 1st, 2019. That's
Correct. It's June 30th, 2020.
June 30th, 2020 is the third hearing.
Oh, sorry, no, the third hearing will be November 6th.
November 6th. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to get the dates correctly on this. All right, so November 6th. All right. And one last comment. So, can you go back and I know Chair Bozovich closed the public hearing, but this isn't necessarily related. So can you go back to that 2020 date again? Because I had to miss the last Cable Commission meeting last time, and I apologize for that, because I'm on the commission as well, so I apologize. But 2020, that is giving all the appropriate organizations the time, plus you mentioned that there's the potential of new rulemaking from the feds as well. So that's why the date has been extended out that
far, correct. Yeah, so that we don't have to keep coming back.
which I think is a good idea. One of the things that Commissioner Farr's brought up, and he's articulated this quite well during when we've been having these Cable Commission meetings, is the fact that the way people are viewing, whether it's television, whatever the case may be, is changing so dramatically. It'll be interesting to see where 2020 even looks like. I mean, I'm an old guy, so I'm likely just either, I'm just going to go with cable. You talk to the youth today, everything's online.
It's Hulu.
It's Hulu. It's Roku. So they get not only Hulu, they get Netflix, they get Amazon, they get everything all in one. And so they're no longer even looking at franchise agreement companies that each of these jurisdictions are dealing with. It's in the air. And I have no idea how you tax oxygen or the air. So that's always the kind of interesting where things are going in the future. So,
Unless they're getting their internet service through the cable company.
which absolute, that's correct. So anyway,
I might just share that Comcast did share at the meeting last Thursday that for the first time, their broadband customers exceed their cable customers. But that the people leaving cable has slowed just a little bit.
Yeah.
So those two things going on.
okay. Anyway, that was my only comment. And other than that, I'm prepared to make the motion there, Mr. Chair.
And Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to move the second reading of ordinance 1809, set the third reading and another public hearing. Is that correct? Okay. In the matter of amending Chapter 8 of the Land Code to extend the term and franchise agreement with Comcast of Oregon 2 for operation of cable communication systems to November 6th, 2018.
That's the
Hearing date.
hearing date.
That's the hearing date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that what I'm doing? Isn't that the
Oh, okay.
third reading and public hearing?
Well, you were reading the title, which.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I
Which
apologize.
is the contract.
Yeah, which is the contract. So we're setting the, my apologies, I'll do this again. Move the second reading, setting the third reading and public hearing of ordinance 1809 for November 6, 2018, and there's not a time certain here, is there?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Second?
So it's been moved and seconded, moved by Commissioner Lycan, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve the second reading and set the third reading and public hearing for November 6, 2018. Discussion to the motion. Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So with that, we are down to Commissioners' business announcements. Any announcements from Commissioners? I will just make note once again that we do have a joint meeting tomorrow. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention that last night I attended a meeting at the First Christian Church. It was local congregations pioneering affordable housing solutions. The reason I bring that up is that we're seeing groups really throughout Lane County who are jumping in and getting on the work wagon. I'll not say the bandwagon, but the work wagon regarding providing affordable housing and we're providing front doors. Last night was a great discussion. There were members of representing maybe as many as 50 churches last night, 50 congregations last night. That may be a little bit of an exaggeration because there are only about 35 people in the room. But the discussion was deep and broad regarding how the communities of faith can get involved even more deeply than they have been in providing relief for poverty and relief for people who are suffering from inadequate or zero housing. So it's Mr. Mokrahajski, tomorrow we'll have the discussion regarding the shelter study or the safe bed study. And it's an ongoing discussion that we're having, and it really is coming to new highs where we're seeing more and more people begin to understand that homelessness is not caused by being lazy, and it's not caused by not having a job. It's caused by circumstances quite often that are beyond people's control. Sometimes a home burns down. Sometimes rent goes up. Sometimes people sell the house from under the renter. And there are so many reasons that people are finding themselves without a home. A large part of the discussion last night in one of the breakout groups talked about how decisions that we make locally regarding not expanding our buildable land inside of urban growth boundaries or to go beyond urban growth boundaries make it more difficult to add front doors and to add housing. It's the truth. It's a part of the decision that we make whenever we say, no, we're not going to add residential space outside of the existing urban growth boundary. Then we need to make certain that we focus on how do we more equitably and innovatively do it inside of the urban growth boundaries. It's an ongoing conversation that we're having, and it's going to last for years because we are not in anywhere near sight of solving the housing issue that we have, the housing issue that really affects just about every single family, every single household, one way or another in Lane County. So it is an ongoing discussion, one that we'll continue to have, and one that, forgive me in advance for talking about it every opportunity that I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday, and this is something where I've had the opportunity to be involved from the very get-go since day one. Yesterday, we heard from, at the AOC Natural Resources Committee, we heard from Mary Gautreaux, Sarah Biddleman, and Malcolm McCreary, all from Senator Wyden's office. Now, Sarah and Malcolm were still in D.C. Mary was here locally, and they provided a presentation and a very, very good discussion to the committee. It's a working title, and it's that Senator Wyden and Senator Crapo from Idaho, who is a Republican, so bipartisan. It's a working title. It's called Fund for Rural Economic Stability and Health Act of 2018. And right now it is not a bill, it's still a concept. But what this, in a sense, does is it creates an endowment. So instead of the timber counties, if you will, the ONC counties continue to go back to Congress and asking for SRS funds, it'll create a permanent endowment. The original number they're looking at is the endowment is somewhere about $6 billion. And then would, over time, interest would be added into that. But this would create more of a stable funding mechanism to the ONC counties. It was a lot of discussion when involved in this because as you know, we're one of the ONC counties, but when it comes to actual ONC lands, I believe Lane is third. I think it's Douglas, Jackson, then Lane. But Lane County is the largest U.S. Forest Service land base, not just in Oregon, but I don't think people realize this. When it comes to harvestable timber, we're #1 in the nation. And so that, and of course, U.S. Forest Service money is road funds. And I think our check last year was like $900,000 when, historically we're receiving $20 million a year. You index that to inflation, it'd be like $40 million in today's dollars. And so right now, I think what you're seeing is that the different organizations, whether it's AOC, the ONC, and different groups, what we're doing is, because first of all, we don't have, there isn't details. As I said, it's a working title, it's a concept, but we're being very supportive. And it does not decouple forest management. So I think that's a key thing. It does not decouple this at all. The ONC Act from 1937 is an act. It's a law, and it states what needs to be done within the act. So that's not it. I think what this does, it clearly has an opportunity to bring forth more stability. Now, the working title is in the Senate only, and there is no working concept in the House, and at this point in time. And as you know, we have some very influential members of the House, and I'm involved in this forest management issue for many years. Most notably Congressman Greg Walden and Peter DeFazio, as well as Kurt Schrader just up north. They've been the three most active. But I think what it does say, it's an interesting idea. And as I stated right now, I don't think we need to say, hey, yeah, this is coming, because it isn't. What it is a concept. But I think this is an opportunity for this board to be aware and also to be engaged in this process going forward. And so the endowment would be separate from the Treasury. So it'd be its own endowment, created somewhat like Red Cross was created. So Red Cross was born out of the federal government, but has its own board, its own executive director that manages those funds. And this would be somewhat created in the same way. That's where the skeptical piece of me comes into play, because the Red Cross, if you think about it, it's about saving lives. But This, on the other hand, this is about limited to a certain amount of counties in the country on dollars coming back. So there'd have to be a significant narrative and a lot of work being done from a public relations standpoint. But right now, I appreciate the work that's being done. It's bipartisan. They've had to kind of put it on hold for a little bit because Senator Crapo's on the Judiciary Committee, and they had some sort of hearing going on there for the last few weeks, some Supreme Court nominee or something like that. Anyway, but that's now over with, and according to Mary, that Senator Crapo and his staff is becoming re-engaged in the process. I'm going to guess it's a working title. You probably won't see much of this until next year, and where you may actually get a bill, but it's something I think is going to be important for this board to be engaged in, and with Senator Wyden personally, and because his staff looks like they're going to be one of the primary drivers, and then we'll hear more where it goes on the House side. So I just want to give an update on that piece. Pardon me for going long, but we actually had about a 45-minute discussion on it yesterday, and I will say Senator Wyden's staff did a very good job in answering the questions that they could. Some of it was about they also have a grant process available, and we're already hearing from some of the smaller counties that, grant process is great, but we don't have staff to deal with that. And so we came back and asked them to take a look at that process, be much more flexible, because Lane County is one thing. We have staff that can work on things like this. Curry County does not, and yet Curry County would be in the most need on having something like this available. So I just want to give an update. It has been kept quiet, but now it's out in the public, and NACO's had a first blush at it as well. But this was the really first blush with AOC and a good back and forth. ONC had a conversation with Mary as well, but this was the very first time, or AOC. And I think it's important with AOC because you're looking at not just ONC dollars and the ONC piece on it, but U.S. Forest Service as well. And so, anyway, that's what I had, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other announcements from commissioners? I just want to remind folks quickly that we are still in fire season. Even though we got a little bit of rain over the weekend, it wasn't as much as was predicted, and the current long-range forecast is for no precipitation for the next several days. And in fact, they're expecting temperatures above normal this weekend, with humidities dropping into the teens during the day with an east wind, which is not what they like to have. So I know that the folks from the ODF and the West Lane District Forester put out a notice that they are not ending fire season. They are lifting some of the restricted use limitations in the forest, but the open burning in particular, which is not allowed during fire season, is still not allowed. So the backyard burning, just to remind folks, is still prohibited until they lift fire season. So we are still in fire season, and backyard burning is not allowed.
Nor a campfire, for that matter. Even on the coast, I experienced this last weekend. So.
They're lifting some of those.
Are they?
Yeah, so that I would check with, your local fire district what you're allowed to do. Some of the mowing restrictions are being lifted, but the actual burning of yard debris is still prohibited, because that has the most opportunity to create off-site fire with the transport of embers. Any other announcements? If not, we'll move on to agenda team requests, and I have one which relates to the AOC issues, and this has actually been developing since AOC, towards the end of last spring and into the summer. If you were attending AOC's regular meetings, and particularly the summer board retreat, was focused purely on the finances. Last spring, AOC hired Moss Adams to do a look-back audit of the organization, and that was all done in a fairly open process through the board. And in that look-back audit, they determined that they had been commingling road funds with the rest of the funds in AOC, and that they hadn't been tracking expenses well and had actually been spending road funds on non-road fund items, creating an indebtedness between the non-road fund side of AOC towards the road fund side, basically, and drawing down the cash balance of the organization. None of it appears to be criminal at this time. They're still in the process of doing a more detailed audit, and it's not item by item, but a more detailed audit of expenditures to look at, one, where things went, and to understand what the actual expenses of the organization were for future budgeting, but two, to look for areas we might want to have more internal controls. They are currently implementing a large amount of recommendations from Moss Adams on internal controls and changes to the budget. They've gone from 9 funds down to 2, because they were creating a fund for each separate program rather than just a road fund and a general fund, and having the programs be subcategories in the general fund. So that all said and done, though, there's an obligation to pay back that road fund money that is currently about $780,000, but when you start looking at interest on that, it's somewhere in the range of about $970,000 that needs to be reimbursed back to the road fund. And one of the things the board's looking at is potentially asking counties to, in a assessment or contribution, pay back that amount in addition to their dues, so that they can, it's either that or they have to start paying it back out of the general fund over the next 10 years, which would create about $100,000 annual payment and decrease the ability to rebuild reserves and also to staff for some of the legislative efforts we do. So the board moved yesterday to recommend that counties make that repayment based on their ability to pay. Would prefer, lump sum payments, but are offering 10-year payment plans, or even will go further if counties need further, based on a calculation of splitting that up according to the AOC's dues formula. This is an estimate I'm passing out. It's just a draft that shows what the amount would be. One's based on 36 counties paying back, one's based on 35, and that's due to Jackson County's withdrawal a couple of years ago where they stopped paying dues. We're actually talking with Jackson County and hopefully getting them back into the fold and to participate. So the approximate amount's going to be somewhere in the range of, say, $65,000 to $75,000 for a lump sum payment. And it has to come out of general fund side of our account. It can't come out of the road fund side because it's reimbursing road fund money. So what I'd like to ask for now is a future agenda item to discuss this and work on how we want to respond to that action. And I was looking to have that probably in the first week of December. Commissioner Farr.
Mr. Chair, you have my agreement on that, on the work session, and you and I were at the regional meeting 4 weeks ago in Albany, where there was a kind of an initial discussion as to the direction to go for. They were looking at it regionally with the counties.
Was reviewed at the district meeting, which everyone was invited to.
And I'll say essentially what I said then. This action was the action that's taken place that has AOC having to repay the road fund. Most people didn't even know there was a road fund, but it's money that's allocated specifically to distribute to counties for road operations in various ways. It's not, by all accounts, it's not a lot of money, but I mean, it's not pocket change either. I'll say what I said then. It does not diminish the great work that AOC has historically done and the great work that I anticipate AOC will do deep into the future. It gives us an opportunity to regroup and make AOC a more effective and more robust group than ever, I believe. That's my opinion, and I'm looking forward to having a work session on this, Mr. Chair, to talk about it and to what I would propose at the time, and I'll say this in advance, to reinvigorate and rededicate our commitment to AOC and the fact that AOC has been a great organization for Lane County and all counties in Oregon to this point. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner
So
Sorensen.
it sounds like we might have at least two options. One is to take $7,400 out of our road fund per year for 10 years.
Out of our general fund.
Out of our general fund.
Yeah.
Or to pay $67,000 out of our general fund.
Right.
So no road fund can be sent back.
Right. We're repaying road fund dollars that have been, we pay part of our AOC dues out of road fund.
Okay.
And what happened at AOC was they were utilizing road fund for the wrong, inappropriately. To some degree. I wouldn't call it so much inappropriately, they didn't account for it well and created a loan to themselves out of a road fund.
Okay. Good. And the difference between the two is whether or not Jackson County participates.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I will say, part of this is they're in the middle of that, finishing all the auditing work. So
Yeah.
this is the estimate as it stands today and could
Yeah.
change a little bit either way.
Yeah.
That's why I'm giving you a range of $65,000 to $75,000 is what our lump sum
Yeah.
liability would be there. And some of the discussion we'll have when we get
Yeah.
into the session is, they can handle it with either do it through the AOC's budget and pay themselves back and do it through economizing in their budget, which is less service from AOC, or we can do it, from our funds. That's a decision we have to decide to participate in or not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate you bringing this up. As one of the committee co-chairs and puts me in the leadership of AOC, but not on the board. So, I've had access to see what was going on, but I really wanted to take time here and say thank you to Chair Bozovich, who is on the board. And frankly, I think the reason why we're here, why AOC is here today, with the change of management, with the change in really moving forward, with why the audit was brought in the first place. I hope people understand Chair Bozovich had a tremendous amount to do with. He's not going to say that, so I will. I would say that Chair Bozovich was one of the strongest voices at the AOC board to say, before this thing gets run into the ground, which, by the way, that's where this was heading, that we need to take a look exactly of how this money is being used, where it's being used. And as Chair Bozovich said, and if that means there needs to be a change in leadership of the organization, so be it. And so, Jay, I just want to say thank you for being having such a hand on the pulse of that organization. And what it allowed to as well, because I think clearly President Pope knew this issue was here, but I think having that strong voice to back him up really propelled this thing forward. So, Jay, I want to say thank you for doing this, because I think what this allows now is for AOC to kind of start back again on good footing. I think Michael Eisen is going to do a terrific job, especially the interim, leading the organization. He knows the organization, and I think Jay mentioned he's going to be doing 2 or 3 jobs with not only being the executive director, but he's still going to be one of those our key lobbyists. Look, and as the session comes in 2019. But I just want to say thank you, Jay, for your strength on this and for your really looking at the financial situation and demanding, because it had to be a demand that we needed to have the audits in place. But also a big thank you to Rob Van Cleve, who's the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and who really was a key person as well from a staff perspective, that there's a problem here. But thank you, Jay, for your leadership on this.
Thank you. So with that, I assume I have 3 head nods for adding that to our agenda in the future. 1, 2, 3, 4. Seems like we got all around five head nods there. Good. Well, thank you for that.
Mr. Chair, we have the conference here in November.
Yes.
AOC conference. Looking forward to that.
Yes, yeah, it's always a good one. And AOC provides us with so much educational opportunity too, particularly for new commissioners through their county college and training folks and getting them grounded in everything commissioners have to do. So, and there's, not to mention what happens on the road fund side, which is running the program that provides the technical support for all of our management of our pavement management system. That software system actually comes out of AOC. So just you know, people probably don't realize how much does come out of AOC. So with that, if there's no further announcements or agenda requests, we are down to review of assignments.
So I just have that one, Mr. Chair, the request for a future agenda item to discuss AOC dues or payments reconciliation in late November, early December.
Great.
And then I had, Mr. Chair, I was going to jump in here on your announcements, but I had 2 quick things that are related to tomorrow's work session with the city councils at ART. If I just provide that update now, I should have done this under my announcements. I received a message last night that the Eugene City Council, that at least one counselor was going to be making a request of the county to look at, that the county consider using some of its land for a proposed public shelter. So we don't know where that land would be, but just that request, that may come up tomorrow. And so I just wanted to provide you that. We received a message from staff at the City of Eugene planning that the city councilor had asked if the county would be willing to use some of its land to build a shelter with the city. So that may be a discussion that comes up tomorrow. And then also related to that, I wanted to share that we probably tomorrow, today or tomorrow, are going to be releasing the funds, $1.5 million in funds from the housing improvement plan that was included in the budget this year, as part of a request for applications that organizations in the community would submit us letters of interest, applications to, for us to review, to consider for that grant program that we developed as part of this year's budget. We've held back a little bit of the funds there in anticipation of their potential use for our MLK supportive housing project. And we've also made a request to the City of Eugene that they participate in financial support for that 50-unit supportive housing facility at MLK. So I just want to put all this on the table that we're putting out there our funds for focused on supportive housing, $1.5 million for grants for supportive housing projects. And we have asked the City of Eugene to participate in helping to support, as you know, Peace Health, Kaiser Permanente, Trillium, and then the low-income tax credits are helping to support that 50-unit, the financing for that 50-unit facility, but we've also asked the City of Eugene to come to the table. So I think it just provides for a healthy conversation between the City Council and the Board of Commissioners around wanting to participate in both of these, both potentially land for public shelter as well as city support for our supportive housing project. So we are going to, sorry, I'm jumbling a few issues, but they're all related. We're going to be releasing, we'll put a news release out as soon as we post that housing improvement plan grant application process either today or tomorrow, so you see that come out, but I wanted to give you a little advance notice on that.
Thank you.
Excellent. I believe Mr. Moker-Heisky at one point, and I'm not sure who was involved, whether it was Howard or the former Assistant Public Works Director, but there was an inventory of county property within city limits done, because we were looking at that issue once before for rest stops, potential rest stop locations, so that we may have a ready inventory. Part of that was also determining what part of that inventory was purchased with road funds.
Right.
And understanding that.
Right, and any zoning restrictions and other things that
Right.
could be used.
Yeah, I think we've done that once before. So.
Yes, and we can dust that off and update that and bring that forward, because that's really where you want to have the conversation is, well, what land do we actually have available that's within the city limits? The reality is it's pretty limited. Once we have our Cebu campus, we have our Delta campus, we have our downtown properties, and then
In the fairgrounds.
you've got the fairgrounds, and then you have park property, not really within the city limits, road fund property, which has some restrictions to it. So there's not actually a lot of land that would easily qualify for, I think, what the needs are for this, but we will pull that together as quickly as we can so that the board can at least take a look at, okay, what are the available options to consider there?
Yeah, great, thank you. Were there any other assignments that we had from today? Is there any other business for the boards this morning? Executive session still no-go?
I don't think we're going to do executive session.
Okay, then we are done. We are adjourned for the day until tomorrow at noon.